disperse the sand. And then fill the bottle up about the rest to about halfway with the still water. And the sample goes on the shaker, and we shake it overnight. And then the next morning we'll then put it in the hydrometer. Now we've got two marks on here. The upper mark is for 100 gram samples, and the lower mark is for 50 gram samples. So then we'll fill up the rest of the hydrometer with distilled water. I usually fill it up to the lower mark first. And then we're going to insert the hydrometer in there. And with the hydrometer inserted, then we bring it up the rest of the way to volume, up to the upper line. So once brought the volume, the next thing is to take a plunger, and then we'll plunge the sample. I usually do it for about 30 seconds to mix it up really well. So when the 30 seconds is up, you take this out, and then you'll wait for 1 minute, and after 1 minute's time, you'll go ahead and insert the hydrometer in there. And I usually try to get it down as much as possible so it doesn't bob up and down a lot. And then you'll take your reading after 1 minute, and then that will give you the percent sand. We'll then let the cylinder sit there for 7 hours, and after 7 hours time, we'll come back and we'll do another reading, and at that time that'll give you the amount of silt that has settled out. And so whatever's left in suspension after that 7 hours will represent the amount of clay that's in the soil. So after we have our hydrometer reading done, we'll then take the sample and we'll pour this through a 270 sieve. So we'll wash the sands through the 270 sieve, and we usually take some water and kind of rinse over the top of the 270 sieve until all of the silt and clay has been is suspended on the sieve, or the silt and the clay will go through the sieve and just leave the sand on top of the sieve. Once we've done that, we'll then transfer the sample from the sieve into the pan, and then we'll put it in the oven and dry it. It usually takes at least 2 or 3 hours to dry the sample. We generally will leave them overnight to make sure they're completely dry. And once the sample is dry, we're then ready to do the sieve analysis. So for the sieve analysis, we'll take the remaining sand portion and we'll pour it onto the sieve. One thing you want to make sure before you do that, though, is that you have the weights of all of these sieves empty, and then you'll record the empty weight of the sieve first, and then pour the sand in there. Then we take the sieves, the sieves will go onto the sieve shaker. We'll start it up. It takes 5 minutes to the sands that are in there have gone all the way down through the sieves, you then remove the sieves from the shaker. And then you'll weigh each sieve to see how much sand has been retained on the sieve. And then you'll record that on your sheet. You go through and do each sieve all the way down, and then even there's a pan on the bottom, you record the weight of that also. And usually what I do once I've done that is I go through and total it up and make sure that your total weight on the sieves comes out pretty close to what you started with. Okay. And that way, if you made an error in weighing one of the sieves along the way, you can catch that pretty quickly and then be able to go back to that sieve and reweigh it. Once the sieves have all been weighed and your numbers look like they jive pretty good, then you're ready to start cleaning the sieves for the next time that you'll run samples. So I usually have a bucket where you're going to dump the excess soil into there. For the larger sieves, the number 10, number 18, number 35, and number 60, we use this wire brush to clean those. And generally the way I do it is kind of do it in a circular motion on the bottom of the sieve to get all the soil out, and then dump it, and then keep going until it looks like you've gotten pretty much all of it out. When you get to some of the finer sieves, sometimes it's kind of hard to tell whether you've got it all out or not, because a lot of times you can't get all the sand out of there. A lot of times what I'll do is I'll clean the sieve and then I'll throw back on the scale and see how close it comes out to the original empty weight. If it's really close to what you started with, then you probably got the sieve clean. So you go down through and you do I set it up to the 60. When you get to the number 100 sieve, we use this bristle brush to clean that. So this is finer one. She's dumped the soil out there, and again, a circular motion to get as much out as you can. Usually the finer ones, they take a little longer to clean. It's a little harder to get the sand out of there, but you keep working it for a couple minutes, and then, like I said, I usually check the weight on the scale once in a while and see how close it is to the original where you started. It is important that you make sure you have the sieves in the proper order. So you're going to start with the number 10 sieve on the top of your stack. So you have the 10 on the top, 18 would be the next one, 35, 60, 100, 140, and 270 is your bottom sieve. That's pretty much the procedure as we do it. With our hydrometer readings, we'll take a hydrometer solution and we'll pour it over this 270 sieve. It's a little larger one than what we normally use for sieving, but it makes it easier when we go to have to wash the sieve. If we have a little larger sieve, it makes it easier to get that out. And sometimes it can be a challenge getting it out of here, but we just kind of spray the water in there to get it all out of the cylinder. And then what we'll do once it's out of the cylinder is usually take a fairly slow amount of water and then just kind of wash the sieve over it, the sand over, kind of wash it back and forth to get any silt or clay that maybe hasn't gone through the sieve yet, get it separated out from the sand. I usually spend probably 3 to 5 minutes doing this in order to make sure I've got all the silt and clay out. And then once it looks like the silt and clay is all out, we'll then take a pan and then we'll wash the sand into that pan. usually be a little bit of organic matter floating on the top. I usually don't worry too much about that since we're not interested in the organic matter. So when we pour off the water, we lose some of the organic matter. That's not really that big a deal. So we end up with a little bit of water in there and the sand, and then this will go in the dryer. Like I said, it'll probably take 2 or 3 hours to dry it. We generally just put them in and leave them overnight to get them dry.
I guess you can kind of explain what you do with profiles if you get them in.
So when we get, they kind of look like this. They're wrapped in tin foil to kind of keep them together so that the sands don't fall apart. So we'll carefully unwrap them. We usually, depending on the cores, some of the cores are fairly well intact, so you can take the tin foil completely off before you cut them. Other cores, if they've got a lot of sand in them, a lot of times they'll start to fall apart if you try to take the tin foil off. So a lot of times I will just cut them with the tin foil on there. So we line up the top of the core here with the wood here, and then we'll run this saw down through there and slice them in different depths. So the top 1 inch here would give you the turf that's there, and also then the top ½ inch of the sand. What we'll do then, once we dry these cores, is we'll take a fork and we'll kind of rake them over and try and get the sand out of there, because with the turf in there, it really holds onto the sand quite tightly, so you kind of have to have something like a fork in order to get the sand pulled out of there as much as possible. The other depths, they usually don't really have much for roots in them, so they're usually pretty easy to, once you dry them, to get your sample out. So this is kind of what the second horizon looks like. It's mostly just sand. It might have some roots in it, but once that's dry, then we'll break up all this. We usually use a rolling pin to break these up really good, and then we're ready to weigh out the 100 grams on the sample.
I'll get a close-up of that right there.